Lord. He was managing the hotel. Until he found her. That is the order of events. That is the only order that matters. Park Jae-hwan, Kai to anyone who had ever met him outside Korea, crossed the Grand Seoul Imperial lobby at 7:43 a.m. with the precision of a man who had never once in his career been the problem. Radio at his waist, earpiece in the left ear, badge tucked inside the breast pocket like something too important to leave exposed. He had already resolved 3 things before reaching the elevator bank. A double booking on the 12th floor that the night shift had buried in the notes and hoped he wouldn't find. A breakfast buffet running 11 minutes behind because 2 of the kitchen staff had called in sick and no one had thought to pull from the banquet reserve, and a German journalist standing at reception with a credential badge that bore someone else's name and the very particular stillness of someone composing a complaint in real time. Kai resolved all 3 without raising his voice. He rarely raised it. The voice was one of the last things you wanted to spend in a place like this. 5th day of the conference. 2 left. He could have delegated the inspection of the 18th floor key panel. That was exactly the kind of task that existed to be delegated. There was a maintenance team. There was a log. There was a system. But Kai had learned early, in a hotel in Los Angeles where he'd started as a floor supervisor at 24, that small things ignored had a way of becoming large things at the worst possible moment. He did not leave small things to chance. He went up. The 18th floor had that quality. All hotel corridors share past a certain hour. The carpet absorbing every sound. The lighting slightly too warm. The sense that whatever is happening downstairs has nothing to do with this particular hallway. Kai checked the access panel at the north end, logged the fault, started back toward the elevator. That's when he saw her. She had chosen the bend of the corridor deliberately, the spot with the least foot traffic, the narrowest sightline from either end. Jasmine Carter. Event badge slightly flipped so the name faced inward. A folder of papers held against her chest like armor that hadn't quite worked. And she was crying in the way that only happens when a person believes, completely, that no one is watching. Kai stopped 3 meters away. He did not approach. He did not pretend he hadn't seen. Are you a guest or staff? Low voice. No drama in it. She straightened immediately, the way someone does when they've been trained to erase themselves at speed. Wiped her face with the back of her hand. Staff, external contractor, interpretation. He looked at the badge, looked at the folder, did the calculation. Have you eaten today? She blinked. It was clearly not the question she'd prepared for. That's not necessary. I didn't ask if it was necessary. A pause opened between them. She looked at him the way people look at something they want to trust, but haven't yet decided whether they can afford to. This is where the story begins. Not with a contract. Not with a secret. With a man who could have walked past, and didn't. With a woman who had spent so long being the competent one, the one who handles it, absorbs it, moves on, that someone asking a simple question felt like the floor shifting under her feet. He asked if she had eaten. She hadn't, and neither of them knew yet what that moment was going to cost them both. If you've ever been in a room full of people and felt completely invisible, keep listening. This story was made for you. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and leave a comment below. It's what keeps us writing. Shakkerforn. The Grand Seoul Imperial operated on the principle that disruption was a problem of preparation, not of circumstance. Every surface in the lobby had been chosen for its capacity to project stability. The pale marble floors, the vertical garden running the height of the north wall, the arrangement of the front desk so that guests always approached from an angle that made them feel received rather than processed. None of this happened by accident. It was Kai's architecture. 3 years of quiet decisions stacked on top of each other until the hotel ran the way a good watch runs, invisibly. The international conference had been booked 14 months in advance. Delegations from 22 countries. Interpretation services contracted through 2 separate agencies. 640 attendees across 4 days of panels, bilateral meetings, and networking dinners that cost more per plate than most people's monthly rent. Kai had prepared for every variable he could name. He had not prepared for Jasmine Carter. Not because she was unpredictable. She was, in fact, relentlessly competent. He had watched her work without her knowing it, the way he watched everything in the hotel, from the margins. She moved through the conference spaces with the particular efficiency of someone who has had to be twice as good to be considered half as essential. Headset in, folder open, voice steady across 4 languages, switching registers mid-sentence with the ease of someone who has spent so long living between worlds that translation had become the only language she fully trusted. He had noticed her on the second day, during the morning plenary. He noticed her the way he noticed anything that worked exceptionally well, with the low appreciation of someone who understands the effort behind the performance. What he hadn't noticed was what was happening underneath it. Minjun found him at the service desk at 8:15 a.m., 2 cups of coffee in hand, and an expression that meant he was about to say something Kai would not immediately want to hear. "The Huang brief is moved up to 9, Minjun said, setting down the cups with the care of someone who understood that bad news went better with caffeine. "And the interpreters had an incident." Kai looked up from the fault log. "What kind?" "Coordinator Reed flagged one of the external contractors in front of the group. Said there was a sequencing error in yesterday's afternoon session. Blamed her directly." Minjun paused. It wasn't her error. Kai was quiet for a moment. "How do you know?" "Because I pulled the booth logs this morning. The error was in the script Reed's team sent at midnight. 2 paragraphs swapped. She worked with what she received." Minjun handed him the second coffee. "She didn't say anything to correct it." Kai took the cup. He thought about the woman on the 18th floor, the folder against her chest, the badge turned inward. He thought about the way she'd said, "It's not necessary." Not as if she meant it, but as if she'd said it so many times it had become reflex. "Where is Reed now?" he asked. "Coordinator's office, 3rd floor. Probably drafting another memo no one asked for." Kai finished the coffee in 2 swallows. "Pull the full booth log from yesterday's session. I want it timestamped and signed by the tech team before 9. Minjun's easy smile held something more careful underneath. "Are you going to get involved?" "I'm going to document what happened." Kai set the cup down. That's different. It was, in fact, only marginally different, and they both knew it. The lobby moved around them. A diplomat's aide crossed the floor with a stack of briefing folders. A bellhop navigated a luggage cart around a cluster of journalists. The vertical garden caught the morning light and threw a faint green shadow across the marble. Everything running exactly as it should. Kai clipped his radio back to his belt and headed for the elevator. He had 22 minutes before the Huang brief. That was enough time to stop by the support room on the 4th floor, the small, underused conference room that he had quietly designated as a staff rest space for the duration of the event, and leave something for whoever needed it. He didn't let himself think too carefully about who he was leaving it for. He left a coffee on the table. Black, the way conference staff drank it when they no longer had the luxury of preference. And next to it, the fault log paper folded open to a blank page, a pen on top. He left without writing anything. The hallway outside was exactly as empty as he'd left it, carpet absorbing the sound of his footsteps, lights a shade too warm, the whole floor carrying that quality of a space that exists between states, neither private nor public, neither safe nor exposed. He took the stairs back down. He did not think about whether she would find the coffee. He thought about it anyway. Chupper Balder. Jasmine found the support room at 9:07 a.m. because Yeonji had told her it existed. SEO Yeonji was the kind of person who knew where all the exits were in any given building, not out of anxiety, but out of the professional fluency of someone who had survived 10 international conferences and understood that the first thing you located was not the restroom or the nearest cafe, but the room where you could be invisible for 15 minutes without it counting against you. 4th floor, East Wing, Yeonji had said that morning, handing Jasmine a badge lanyard without comment. The original one had been flipped. Yeonji had simply reached over and corrected it, the way you'd fix a collar on a friend, as if it weren't even a notable act. Nobody uses it except the AV crew at setup. It has a couch. Jasmine had not slept well. She had not slept well since Monday, which was the day Marcus Reed had stood in front of 12 interpreters and announced, with the specific confidence of someone who has never been wrong in a room where it mattered, that the sequencing failure in panel 4 was interpreter error. He had not used her name. He hadn't needed to. The way he'd looked at her while speaking had been sufficiently precise. She had not corrected him. That was the part she couldn't stop turning over. She hadn't corrected him, not because she didn't know the error had originated in the midnight script his team had sent, not because she lacked the evidence, but because she had run the calculation in under 3 seconds and arrived at the same answer she always arrived at. Saying something makes you the problem. The foreigner who causes friction. The contractor who complicates things. The one they don't call back. So she had absorbed it. Written it into the column of things she carried. The support room was exactly as Yeonji had described. A couch. A low table. A window that faced a narrow service alley, which meant no one would pass and glance in. And on the table, something that hadn't been there the day before. A cup of coffee, still warm enough to matter. Jasmine stood in the doorway for a moment. She was not the type to be moved by small gestures. She had spent years building the version of herself that wasn't. The version that thanked people efficiently and moved on. But something about that cup, sitting on an empty table in a room no one used, struck her in a place she hadn't guarded. She sat down, drank the coffee, let herself be still for 8 minutes. Then she opened the folder in her lap. The script Reed's team had sent at midnight was still in there. She had printed it, because she printed everything. She looked at the 2 swapped paragraphs. They were subtle enough that a listener wouldn't catch it in real time, but clear enough in retrospect that anyone reading the transcript would see exactly where the error had entered. She had carried it anyway, had rerouted the meaning mid-sentence to minimize the disruption, which was why most of the room hadn't even noticed a fault had occurred at all. Her adaptation had saved the session. The credit had gone to no one, because nothing had officially gone wrong. The blame had come to her regardless. She took the pen she always held between her fingers, the one that had been with her through every contract, every exam, every room she'd had to enter twice as prepared as everyone else. And she wrote 1 sentence on the blank page of the log paper she found underneath the cup. "Thank you. I don't know who left this." She folded it back, left it on the table. Then she picked up the folder and went back to work, because that is what she always did. Because stopping was not something she had yet learned to do without guilt. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't know until much later, was that Kai had already seen the booth logs. That at the exact moment she was sitting in the support room, he was in a meeting with Director Huang outlining the timeline of the midnight script delivery, the sequencing error, and the nature of interpreter adaptation under time pressure. He had not mentioned her name. He had not needed to. The documentation did that without exposing her. That was the first move. It would not be the last. The meeting with Director Huang lasted 31 minutes. Kai had come in with the time-stamped booth logs, the midnight script delivery record, and a brief technical summary of what interpreter adaptation under compromised conditions actually entailed. The kind of summary that required no comment because the facts did all the work. Director Huang had read it with the focused neutrality of someone who had spent 3 decades in hospitality management and understood that the most dangerous problems were the ones that sounded like someone else's department. Reed's team submitted the corrected script at midnight, Kai said, which gave the interpretation booth approximately 6 hours to integrate revisions across 4 language tracks. The sequencing error existed in the source document. The adaptation that occurred during the session was a containment measure, not a failure. Huang looked up from the documents. His expression was the same one Kai had seen him wear when reading quarterly reports. Not approval, not disapproval, but the face of someone calculating the exact weight of what they're holding. "You're documenting this. I'm ensuring the record reflects what happened. Is there a complaint?" "Not yet." Huang closed the folder. "Then what is this?" "Prevention." Kai held his gaze. If Reed files something later, The hotel's name is attached to whatever version of events exists at that point. I'd rather the accurate version exist first. A pause, the kind Huang used to make people uncomfortable. Kai had learned not to fill them. File it in operations, Huang said finally. No distribution. Kai nodded. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and left. In the hallway outside Huang's office, Minjun was waiting with the particular expression of someone who has been pretending to check his phone for the last 20 minutes. He filed it? Minjun asked. Operations hold. That's better than nothing. It's enough. Kai started down the corridor. Reed won't move if there's a paper trail he doesn't control. Minjun fell into step beside him. She doesn't know you did this. Kai didn't answer. I'm just noting that for the record, Minjun continued, entirely unfazed. In case it becomes relevant later, which I think it will. You think a lot of things that aren't your job. My job is operations support, which is extremely broad. Minjun tucked his phone away. She was in the support room this morning. She left a note on the table. Kai slowed slightly. You checked the room. The AV crew uses it at noon. I was leaving a schedule update. He paused. She wrote, Thank you, I don't know who left this. They reached the elevator bank. Kai pressed the call button, said nothing. So she doesn't know it was you, Minjun said. And you're not going to tell her. There's nothing to tell. I left a cup of coffee in a staff room. You documented her case to the VP of Hospitality. I submitted accurate records. Kai. Minjun used that specific tone, not insubordinate, not quite, of someone who had worked alongside a person long enough to say what others wouldn't. You can call it whatever you need to call it, but you know what you did. The elevator arrived. Kai stepped in. The afternoon session starts at 2, he said. I need the south corridor cleared by 1:30. Minjun pressed the door open button, holding it. Does she know you went up there this morning? Not the documentation, just the hallway. Does she know you stopped? A beat. No, Kai said. Minjun let the door close. The documentation was filed by 10:45 a.m. Reed received no formal notification because the file wasn't in Reed's name. It was in the conference operational log, time-stamped against the source material, attached to no particular complaint. It simply existed. Which meant that if Reed chose to escalate something against Jasmine Carter, he would be escalating against a record that quietly, thoroughly, told a different story. It was not saving her. It was not her decision. She had never been consulted. That was going to matter. Later, it was going to matter very much. She found out on Thursday. Yeonji told her, not because it was gossip, but because she believed information was something people had a right to when it directly affected them. They were between sessions, standing in the corridor outside panel 3, both of them with headsets around their necks, and the particular fatigue in their eyes of people operating at the edge of their capacity. The booth logs were submitted to Huang's office Wednesday morning, Yeonji said, voice low, direct. Time-stamped against the midnight script delivery. Reed's claim that it was interpreter error now has a contradicting record in the hotel's operational file. Jasmine was quiet. I thought you should know, Yeonji continued, since it was done without asking you. Who filed it? Yeonji looked at her, said nothing, which was its own answer. Jasmine held the headset in both hands. She was aware, with the precise clarity of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly, of the specific sensation rising in her chest, not the one she'd expected, which was relief. Something sharper, something that had her jaw tight and her eyes very still. She found Kai at 4 p.m., between the end of the afternoon panel and the cocktail hour setup. He was doing what he always seemed to be doing, standing at the margin of something, overseeing without interfering, a half step outside whatever was happening in the center of the room. She came to stand in front of him, directly, and watched him register her expression with the trained calm of someone who knew how not to react before he understood what he was reacting to. You filed the booth logs, she said. Not a question. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. She breathed through her nose. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. It wasn't your decision to make. Her voice was level, controlled in the way that required more effort than anger. I was handling it. Kai looked at her without flinching. You were absorbing it. That's different. That was my choice. She took one step closer, not aggressive, but close enough that the conversation became fully private. I know what I'm doing in these rooms, Kai. I know how it works. If I had decided to push back, I would have pushed back. You took that decision off the table. He opened his mouth. Don't tell me it helped. Her voice dropped, not in volume but in register. I know it helped. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you did it without asking me. And I've spent my whole career fighting to not be managed. A pause opened between them. He held it. You're right, he said finally. She blinked. She had not prepared for that. I made a decision about something that affected you without giving you the choice. That wasn't about you. It was about what I'm used to doing. He kept his eyes on hers. I'm sorry. She hadn't prepared for that either. She stepped back, looked away, briefly, at the lobby below, at the organized movement of it, all those people navigating all those invisible hierarchies with practiced precision. Then she looked back at him. I need you to not do that again, she said. Whatever this is, whatever is happening, I need you to understand that I'm not a problem you solve. I don't think that. Good. She straightened her badge. Then act like it. She walked away. He watched her go with the expression of someone who has just been handed a mirror they weren't sure they wanted to look into, and who is already looking. The confrontation created a specific kind of distance. Not hostility. Something more complicated. The silence that forms between two people who have said something true to each other, and now have to live in the same building with it. Kai sent no messages, made no gestures. He stayed in his lane with the discipline of someone who had spent his life knowing exactly where his lane was. Jasmine moved through the conference's final day with her headset in and her folder open, crossing Kai's path in hallways and elevators, without either of them acknowledging the weight that followed them both around like a third person. It was Yeonji who closed the gap, or at least she opened the door to it. Friday evening, after the last panel had wrapped, and the cocktail reception was filling with the controlled relief of people who had made it to the end of a difficult week, Yeonji guided Jasmine to a small seating area off the main hall, with the efficient kindness of someone who has identified that a person needs to sit down before the person has identified it themselves. You're angry at him, Yeonji said, without preamble. I'm not angry anymore. I said what I needed to say. You're something. Yeonji considered her. Not everything he did was about you, you know. Jasmine looked up. He arrived here 3 years ago, Yeonji said. He was 32, Korean-American, had only ever worked in the U.S. His Korean was functional, but his accent was American. His management style was American. His sense of humor was American. And this hotel... She paused, choosing her words. This hotel has a specific idea of what the person in his position is supposed to look like. Sound like. Move like. Jasmine was quiet. He spent his first year here being tested. Yeonji continued. Not formally. Nothing so clean. Just the way they test people they're not sure about. The small slights. The meetings where someone else gets credit. The requests that come with extra scrutiny attached. She looked out at the reception. He never said anything about it. He just worked. He made himself indispensable, and eventually they ran out of reasons not to respect him. How do you know this? Jasmine asked. Because I was one of the interpreters on his first major conference here. I watched it happen in real time. She turned back to Jasmine. When he saw you in that hallway Wednesday morning, and I'm guessing it happened in a way that would have been easy to walk past. He didn't walk past. And when he went to Hwang's office with that documentation, it wasn't nothing. For a man in his position, in this specific hotel, going to the VP of hospitality to protect a contractor who isn't even on the hotel payroll, that's a risk he didn't have to take. Jasmine said nothing for a long moment. I'm not telling you how to feel about it, Yeonji added. You had every right to be angry. He overstepped. Both things are true. She stood, adjusting her glasses with the mild authority of someone wrapping up a conversation at a time of her choosing. I just thought you might want the full picture. She left Jasmine with it. The reception hummed around her. Jasmine held her glass and looked through the crowd until she found Kai, standing at the edge of the room, exactly where he always stood, earpiece in, radio at his waist. He was watching the event with the focused calm she had come to recognize as the mode he defaulted to when there was nothing left to manage, and he still didn't know how to stop. She thought about the coffee on the table in the support room. She thought about him asking if she'd eaten. She thought about how long it had been since anyone in a professional space had looked at her and seen a person first. Not a resource, not a potential problem, not a contractor to be evaluated, just a person who hadn't eaten and probably should. She finished her drink. When she crossed the room toward the exit, she took the route that passed by where he was standing. She didn't stop. But she met his eyes for exactly 1 second, long enough to be a communication, short enough to be deniable. And then she was through the door. He stood very still for a moment afterward. Then Minjun appeared at his elbow with an expression of studied innocence. She looked at you. Minjun said. The conference ended. She was leaving. She walked specifically past you to leave through a door that's farther from the elevator. Kai adjusted his earpiece and said nothing. Minjun smiled and said nothing either, which was somehow worse. There was a category of thing that Kai had spent 3 years not examining. The efficiency with which he'd shut it down was almost impressive. He had taken every private inconvenience, every moment of self-doubt, every flash of wanting something that couldn't be logged in an operations file, and converted it into action items, into resolvable problems, into the next thing on the list. Jasmine Carter was not on the list. She was nowhere near the list. And the fact that he was thinking about her at 10:15 p.m. while standing in a hotel lobby with 30 things that still technically required his attention was information he did not yet know what to do with. So he did what he always did with information he wasn't ready for. He filed it, went back to work, and told himself it was contained. Minjun would have found this hilarious if he'd known. Minjun probably knew. The email arrived at 11:24 p.m. Jasmine had been in bed for 20 minutes, half watching something on her phone without actually seeing it. The notification came from an address she recognized, a senior consultant at a multilateral agency in Geneva, someone she had interviewed with 8 months ago and heard nothing from since. She sat up. It was a formal offer. 6-month contract, renewable. Simultaneous interpretation for the agency's Human Rights Division, which handled some of the highest stakes hearings in the field. The kind of assignment that existed at the top of a career like hers. The kind of assignment she had been building toward for years. The offer was good. It was everything she had told herself she wanted. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the bed and lay back and looked at the ceiling. The logical move was clear. Accept. She was in Seoul for a contract that ended Sunday morning. The offer from Geneva was exactly what she had designed her professional life to support. There was nothing keeping her here. There was no reason to hesitate. She picked the phone back up, read it a third time. The deadline to respond was Monday. She turned off the screen and lay in the dark thinking about the thing she couldn't name directly. The specific quality of quiet that had existed in the support room with that cup of coffee before she'd known where it came from. The way a small gesture, correctly made, could land in a place that no amount of professionalism had prepared her for. And then, because she was honest with herself in the dark in a way she rarely was in daylight, I always leave before they make me the problem. She had said that to Yeonji as if it were a reasonable strategy. Sitting here now, with an offer in her email and a decision she was already half made on, she could see the shape of the pattern very clearly. She was about to do it again. That didn't mean she wasn't going to do it, but she knew what it was. Down on the 17th floor, Kai was also not sleeping. He was sitting at the small desk in his office, not the one off the lobby, but the one on the residential floor that no one official knew about. The one that had been a storeroom until he'd quietly reclaimed it, going over the events log for the week with the methodical attention he applied to everything. He was not thinking about Jasmine Carter. He was thinking about her the way you think about something you've decided not to think about, which is the most consistent way of thinking about anything. He was thinking about the note she'd left in the support room. "Thank you. I don't know who left this." About the anger she'd had the grace to deliver directly to him, rather than letting it become something that festered and contaminated. About the way she'd said, "I'm not a problem you solve." Not as an attack, but as a clarification, as someone drawing the line between how they had been treated and how they intended to be treated from this point forward. He thought about the first hotel where he'd worked, in Los Angeles, where he'd been one of the only Korean staff members and had spent a year being too Korean to be trusted with the international accounts and too American to be fully accepted by the Korean staff either. The particular loneliness of occupying a space between two identities without being claimed by either. He thought about the fact that he had never told anyone that story. Not here. Not completely. He closed the events log. He thought about Sunday, when the conference would be over, and Jasmine Carter would collect her bag and her folder and her badge and leave the hotel. He thought about the particular variety of loss that comes not from something ending badly, but from something ending before it finished being what it was becoming. He thought about whether there was anything left to do about that. He didn't reach a conclusion before he finally fell asleep at his desk, which was where Min-jun found him the next morning, and where Min-jun had the professionalism not to say a single word about it. If you're already hoping they figure it out, you're not alone. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. It matters. Saturday arrived with the specific weight of a last day, everything functioning at full capacity while underneath it the week was already beginning to close. Marcus Reed made his move at 10 a.m. He had been watching the documentation situation develop with the peripheral awareness of someone who doesn't read memos carefully, but notices their effects. He knew the booth log had gone to Huang's office. He didn't know the exact contents, but he knew enough to understand that something he had considered settled was now considerably less so. And Marcus Reed's professional reflex, honed across 15 years of event coordination in environments where appearing in control was the same as being in control, was to get ahead of any narrative that threatened his position. He went to Director Huang directly, not through channels. Directly, which was the kind of move that was either very confident or very desperate. Min-jun intercepted the intelligence through the assistant network that exists in every hotel, the invisible web of people who see everything and whom no one remembers seeing, and had it on Kai's phone within the hour. The text read, "Reed went to Huang 10 minutes ago, mentioned operational irregularities and inappropriate contractor support. He's framing it as favoritism." Kai read it in the south corridor, between a diplomat's aide and a room service cart. He typed back, "Has Huang responded?" Not yet, but he asked Reed to put it in writing. Kai put the phone in his pocket. The thing about Reed's move was that it was not entirely wrong, which was what made it effective. The documentation Kai had submitted to Huang was accurate. The rationale behind it was also accurate. But the relationship between the hotel's general manager and an external contractor, any special attention paid, any gesture made, existed in a space that could be read multiple ways by someone motivated to read it badly. He had known this when he left the coffee. He had known it when he submitted the logs. He had made those decisions with full awareness of what they could cost. He found Min-jun on the 4th floor. "What does Reed actually have?" he asked. "The coffee. He's saying you provided preferential treatment to a specific contractor during a period of active dispute. A cup of coffee in a staff room that's designated for all staff. Yes, he's going to use it as evidence of bias." Min-jun folded his arms. "You could say it was standard staff support. You could say you had no particular knowledge of who would use the room. You could probably contain it if you're willing to." He paused. "Let the specifics be vague." Kai looked at him. "I know," Min-jun said quietly. "I know you won't. If I let the record be vague, It protects me, but it makes what I actually did look like something it wasn't. And it leaves Jasmine in a position where she's the unnamed contractor at the center of an allegation she doesn't even know exists. Then you tell the truth. Then I tell the truth. He checked his watch. Set up a meeting with Huang for this afternoon, before the closing reception. Minjun was already typing. And Jasmine? I need to tell her before Huang's meeting. She deserves to know what's happening. She's going to be angry again. Probably. He started toward the elevator. Less than she would be if she found out afterward. He found her in the corridor outside the translation services room, between sessions, headset around her neck, a cup of tea in her hand. She looked up when she saw him coming, and read his expression with the speed of someone who has learned to parse faces quickly. What happened? She asked. He told her. All of it. The documentation, the coffee, Reed's move, Huang's request for a written account. He told her in the direct, unembellished way he did everything, standing in a hotel corridor with the sound of the conference humming around them. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence stretched out. You knew this could happen, she said. Yes. When you left the coffee. When you submitted the logs. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not toward warmth exactly, not yet, but toward something more precise and considered than anger. Why? The honest answer was the only answer he had. Because it was right. And because I've spent a long time doing things the careful way and calling it integrity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they're not. She nodded once. Not agreement, necessarily. Recognition. What do you need from me? She asked. Nothing. This is between me and the hotel. Your contract is complete regardless of outcome. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. What do you need from me? She repeated, and this time the emphasis was unmistakable. Not, what do you need for the situation, but, what do you need? He opened his mouth, closed it, said finally, I need to do this honestly, that's all. She held his gaze for another beat. Then she said quietly, okay. And that small word contained more than either of them was ready to name. The meeting with Director Huang was scheduled for 3 p.m., in the executive conference room on the second floor. Kai arrived 4 minutes early. Huang was already there. Reed's written account was on the table. Huang had read it. His expression gave away nothing except the particular attention he directed at Kai when he sat down, the evaluation that never fully stopped. Reed is alleging that you acted with partiality toward a specific external contractor, Huang said. That the documentation you submitted to my office was motivated by personal interest rather than operational accuracy. That the support room access and the anonymous amenity provided were forms of preferential treatment that compromised the integrity of the hotel's contractor management. Yes, Kai said. That's his claim. And? Kai had his documentation with him. He set it on the table but didn't push it forward yet. Everything I submitted to your office is accurate, he said. The sequencing error originated in Reed's midnight script. The interpreter adapted without notification because she understood the consequences of raising it during the session. She absorbed a mistake that wasn't hers, rather than create disruption. The documentation exists to ensure that the hotel's record reflects reality. And the coffee? Kai held Huang's gaze. I left it in the staff support room. I did it because I had watched a contractor absorb extraordinary pressure for 4 days without complaint, saw her in clear distress, and made a choice to leave something without making her ask for it. It was personal, not preferential. I knew at the time that the distinction would be difficult to prove. Huang was quiet. I could tell you it was standard staff management. Kai continued. I could frame it as a routine operational decision, and the language would hold up. But it wouldn't be true. And I've spent enough time in places where I had to make myself smaller to fit, where I had to let the record be incomplete to stay comfortable, that I'm not willing to do it here. Not about this. Another silence. Huang picked up the documentation, leafed through it. You've been here 3 years, he said without looking up. Yes. You have built something here that this hotel did not have before you arrived. He set the papers down. You've also made a decision this week that could be interpreted as a serious lapse in professional judgment. Kai said nothing. Reed will not pursue this formally, Huang said. I told him 20 minutes ago that if he submits a formal complaint, the booth logs become part of the public conference record, which means his team's midnight script error becomes part of the public conference record, and the nature of his allegation, made by a coordinator attempting to redirect accountability, becomes very clear to the organizations that contracted him. He folded his hands. He chose not to proceed. Kai absorbed this. What I am telling you, Huang continued, is that you were fortunate that the truth is useful here. That is not always the case. What you did required honesty to protect you, but it was still a risk you took without knowing that outcome. I know. I'm noting this conversation in your file. Not as a reprimand. As a record. Huang looked at him with the directness that Kai had learned, over 3 years, was his form of respect. You did something human this week. In this building, that's not always rewarded. I want there to be a record that this time, it was. Kai let out a breath he had been holding for approximately 2 days. Sunday morning arrived pale and quiet. The conference was over. The delegations had filtered out through Saturday night, and the hotel had already begun the process of resetting. Fresh linens, rearranged furniture, the lobby returned to the particular elegant neutrality it held between events. The vertical garden caught the morning light. The marble floors were immaculate. Jasmine came down at 8:30 with her suitcase and her carry-on and her folder, always the folder, and settled her account at the front desk with the efficient courtesy of someone who has done this hundreds of times. She had responded to the Geneva email at 2 a.m. She had written 3 drafts and deleted 2 of them. The third one she'd kept was honest in a way the other 2 weren't. She told them she needed until Tuesday to confirm, that she had something to resolve first. It was the first time in her career she had asked for more time for a reason that had nothing to do with the contract itself. She pulled her suitcase toward the elevator bank and stopped. The 18th floor. She hadn't planned it consciously, but she found herself pressing the button and riding up in silence, suitcase beside her. The familiar weight of all the decisions she'd accumulated over the last week, somehow heavier and also easier to carry than before. The elevator opened. The corridor was exactly as it always was. Carpet absorbing sound, lights a shade too warm, the quality of a space between things. She walked to the bend where she had stood on Wednesday morning, leaned back against the wall. She stood there for a moment in the quiet and let herself be exactly where she was. Not holding it in, not performing competence, just standing in a hallway on the 18th floor of a hotel in Seoul, tired and unguarded, and more herself than she had been in longer than she could comfortably admit. The elevator opened behind her. She didn't turn around immediately. She knew the sound of his footsteps, not because she had memorized them deliberately, but because in a week of paying attention to her environment, she had paid attention to him. Not by accident, she said. Not by accident, Kai said. He came to stand beside her. Not opposite, not at a careful distance. Beside her, leaning against the same wall, looking down the same empty corridor. Huang closed it, he said. Reed withdrew. I know. Yeonji told me. She looked at the corridor. How are you? He seemed slightly surprised by the question. Not offended, just unused to being the one it was directed at. Intact, he said finally. Honest, which feels different than I remembered. When was the last time? A while. He looked at the floor. I arrived here 3 years ago and spent the first year being tested in ways no one said out loud. I learned to make myself useful enough that the testing would stop. I stopped being honest about what that cost me somewhere in year 2. She was quiet. I saw you on Wednesday, he said, and I recognized something. Not the crying, the thing underneath it. The way you were trying to take up as little space as possible while clearly holding something very large. He paused. I didn't handle what came after perfectly. No, she agreed. But the first thing you did, asking if I had eaten, that was right. It was the only question I knew how to ask. Nishi turned to look at him. He turned to look at her. The fluorescent light was the same slightly inadequate warmth it always was up here, and it was the most honest light she'd been seen in all week. I got an offer, she said. Geneva, Human Rights Division. I know. Minjun mentioned you were waiting on something. She raised an eyebrow. He notices things, Kai said, with the dry tone of someone who has made peace with this. Are you taking it? I haven't decided. She held his gaze. I always leave before things get complicated. It's what I do. I told myself it was professional instinct. This week I started to wonder if it was something else. What does it feel like this time? She thought about it seriously, not performing the consideration, actually doing it. Like I want to know what happens if I stay long enough to find out. The hallway was very quiet. That's a different answer than usual, she said. Yes, he agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Kai reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the folded ledge of the hall console beside her. A pen. Not hers. A plain hotel pen, the kind that existed in thousands of identical rooms below them. He set it there and looked at it. Your contract ends today, he said. Mine doesn't. I know what that means logistically. It means it's complicated. Yes. She picked up the pen, held it between her fingers. The same habit, the familiar grip. She felt the small weight of it and thought about what Yeonji had said. Both things can be true. The complication was real. So was whatever was standing here with them in this hallway. I'm going to go downstairs, she said. I have a car in 40 minutes. I know. And then I'm going to go back to my apartment and think very carefully about Geneva. She looked at him. And I'm going to think about other things too. He nodded. She pushed off the wall, straightened. Badge centered for the first time all week. Blazer settled, folder under her arm. Thank you, she said, for not treating me like a problem. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but held everything a smile held. You were never close to one. She walked toward the elevator. He stayed at the wall and watched her go, the way he had watched the lobby all week, with full attention and the discipline not to try to hold what wasn't his to hold yet. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She did not press the button immediately. She looked back at him, down the long corridor, across the carpet that absorbed every sound, under the lights that were slightly too warm. And she said, There's a coffee place 2 blocks from the hotel that's not on any conference schedule. A pause. I know it, he said. Tuesday, she said. At 10. The doors closed. He stood in the empty hallway for a long moment. Then he breathed out through his nose and went back to managing the hotel, which was still there, still running, still requiring 3 things resolved before breakfast. He resolved them all. He did it slightly differently than he had before. Tuesday at 10 was not a dinner. It was coffee that became lunch because neither of them was in a hurry for once in their professional lives, which was itself a kind of landmark. The cafe was small, the kind of place that operates outside the ecosystem of international conferences and expense accounts, with wooden tables and windows that looked onto a street where ordinary Seoul went about its business. Kai arrived 2 minutes before 10. Jasmine arrived 1 minute before, which surprised him and which she clocked him noticing. I'm always early, she said. I just sometimes wait in the street. Why? Because arriving first into a room I don't know feels like showing too much. He looked at her. And this time? She sat down across from him. This time I'm choosing to show it anyway. It was, in its way, the most significant thing either of them said in the first hour. The rest was quieter. The actual conversation of 2 people who had spent a week communicating in professional code and were now, tentatively, trying out the uncoded version. He told her about Los Angeles, about the hotel where he had started, the Korean-American fracture, the years of not quite fitting anywhere. She told him about the contract 2 years ago where a colleague's error had been assigned to her, and she had absorbed it because the math on speaking up had come out wrong, and how she had told herself it was strategic and believed it for almost a year before understanding what it had cost. "I thought being indispensable protected you," she said. "It does," he said. "It just doesn't protect you from everything." They ordered lunch. The conversation did not flag. That was the thing about two people who had been paying attention to each other for a week, without the framework to act on it. When the framework finally appeared, there was a great deal already accumulated, already real, needing very little ceremony. She had told Geneva she needed until Friday. He did not ask her what she was going to decide. She did not offer it. Some things were still being resolved, and they both understood that resolving them required being honest without rushing, which was a skill that neither of them had fully developed, but both of them were clearly trying. "The 18th floor," she said at one point over the second coffee. "Yes?" "The key panel fault. Was that real, or did you manufacture a reason to be up there?" He looked at her steadily. "The fault was real. I logged it at 7:52 a.m. You can verify that in the maintenance record. But you could have sent someone." "Yes, but you didn't." "No." She nodded. "Okay. Okay, meaning what?" "Meaning I believe you." She turned her cup in her hands. "And meaning, there's something to the idea that the right place can put you in front of the right thing, even when you didn't plan it. Even when you were there for a completely different reason. Even when the thing you find isn't in any itinerary or operations log you've ever written." He thought about the key panel, about the code that hadn't worked on the first try, about the way he had stood in the corridor and almost left before he heard something. Not a sound exactly, but the quality of a silence that wasn't empty. "Sometimes you try again," he said. She looked at him. "Sometimes you do." The street outside carried the ordinary Tuesday business of the city, people moving through their lives with the self-contained purpose of somewhere to be. Inside the cafe, at a wooden table with second coffees cooling between them, two people who had spent their professional lives between identities and managing it alone were doing something new, being neither fully careful nor careless, just present, which was, for both of them, the hardest and most necessary thing they had attempted in years. 6 weeks later, Jasmine Carter returned to the Grand Seoul Imperial, not for a conference, not as an external contractor. The Geneva offer had been accepted, conditional on a 2-week delay because the agency had, surprisingly, agreed to a request she had not thought she would make, to begin remotely from Seoul, while she completed a short-term residency contract she had negotiated directly with the hotel's interpretation services department for an upcoming bilateral summit. She had negotiated it herself, signed the contract herself, with the pen she kept between her fingers, now worn at the grip in a way that felt earned. The lobby looked the same. Marble floors, vertical garden, the orchestrated movement of a high-functioning system. She crossed the foyer with her badge properly centered and her folder tucked under one arm, and she nodded to the front desk staff who had seen her before and registered her return with the mild professional courtesy of people who notice everything and comment on nothing. Min-jun was at the service desk. He looked up, saw her, and his expression went through 3 stages in under 2 seconds: surprise, delight, and the very deliberate performance of not having any reaction at all. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Welcome back. Good to be back." She held his gaze. "Is he in?" "South Wing inspection. Back in 12 minutes. Min-jun handed her a visitor pass without being asked. "Support room on the 4th floor is free, if you want to leave something." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I'll wait in the lobby," she said. She sat in one of the lobby chairs that faced the south entrance, which was not the entrance she had arrived through but was the entrance he would come back through. She set her folder on her knee, took out the pen, and she was still holding it, still the same habit, the same grip, when Kai came through the south doors at 11:17 a.m. He saw her immediately. He stopped. She stood. For a moment they were simply across the lobby from each other. The marble floor between them, the vertical garden throwing its faint green light, the orchestrated movement of the hotel continuing around them as if this were any ordinary morning in a building full of ordinary mornings. Then he walked toward her, and she didn't move away from it, and when he reached her, he stopped at exactly the same distance he had kept that first morning on the 18th floor. 3 meters, respectful, present, and then he crossed that distance too, which was a different kind of statement. "You came back," he said. "I negotiated a reason to." He looked at her with the expression that was almost a smile. Was the reason the summit? Partly. She held his gaze. The other part isn't in the contract. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a hotel pen, not the same one, but the same kind. He held it out. "Then we'll have to figure out where to put it." She looked at the pen. She was already holding one. She took his anyway. Later, after the coffee that became lunch again, after the conversation that covered a great deal of ground they had been slowly mapping toward each other since a Tuesday morning on the 18th floor, they went back up. Not because anything needed to be resolved there, because they wanted to. The corridor was the same, carpet-absorbing sound, lights a shade too warm. The feeling that what happens below has nothing to do with this hallway. She stood where she had stood that first morning. He stood where he had stood, 3 meters away, respectful. And then he walked forward and stood beside her instead, which was where he had been standing ever since she'd said Tuesday at 10, with the elevator doors closing between them. "It's smaller than I remembered," she said. "It always looks different when it's not the worst moment of your week." She looked down the corridor. "It's still a good hallway." "Yes," he said. "It is." The key panel at the north end had been repaired weeks ago. The code worked on the first try now, but neither of them was looking at it. They were looking at the hallway that had given them nothing to hide in and everything to find. Here is what is true about the Grand Seoul Imperial at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. Everything works. The lobby is precise, the breakfast buffet is on time, the German journalist has the right credential, and the general manager crosses the foyer with the radio at his waist, and 3 problems already in the process of being resolved. The hotel runs like a well-built thing, beautiful in its efficiency, consistent, reliable. And in the middle of all that precision, on the 18th floor, there is a woman leaning against a wall in a corridor that no one uses. Badge turned inward, folder pressed to her chest, crying in the way you cry when you have finally allowed yourself to be alone enough for it. She is not a problem to be solved. She is not a resource to be managed. She is a person who has been carrying things that were never hers to carry, for longer than it should have taken anyone to notice. And the man who notices is the one who could most easily have walked past. This is not a story about rescue. Jasmine Carter does not need rescuing. She needs the one thing that had been consistently unavailable to her in every professional space she had ever occupied, to be treated as though her presence mattered more than her performance, to be asked the right question at the right moment, to be given a choice about her own story. Kai Park gives her none of the things she would have resisted. He does not swoop in. He does not fix everything. He submits accurate documentation and leaves a cup of coffee on a table and tells the truth to his superiors when a lie would have been considerably safer, and in doing so he does the rarest thing. He shows her what it looks like when someone acts from integrity, without requiring her to witness it or thank him for it. The lesson is not romantic, though the love is real. The lesson is this: the people who have spent the longest time learning to need nothing are often the ones who have been taught most consistently that needing is dangerous. And it is not a therapist or a mentor or a professional development plan that interrupts that lesson. It is a moment, a specific person, a question that assumes the answer matters. Have you eaten today? Not, can I help? Not, what's wrong? Not, let me know if you need anything, which is another way of saying nothing. Just the question that assumes you are a person first. Jasmine ends this story having signed her most significant contract, not the one in Geneva, though that is real and earned, but the one with herself. The agreement that asking for support is not a concession, that being seen is not a vulnerability, that she does not have to disappear into competence to justify the space she occupies. She ends it holding 2 pens, both hers, both chosen. Kai ends it having been whole, out loud, in a building where he had spent 3 years being careful, having told the truth when the careful version would have held, having stood in the same hallway twice, once as the man who manages everything, and once as the man who has decided that managing himself honestly is the more important job. The 18th floor is quiet. The lights are still slightly too warm. The carpet still absorbs every sound. But now when they stand in it, neither of them is hiding. The hallway still exists. They still choose to be in it. Not because they have nowhere else to go, but because it's where they learn to be exactly who they are. And that, it turns out, is the only credential that matters. She walked into that hallway trying not to make noise. She left it as the main presence in every room she entered after that. That's the whole story. Thank you for listening.